What a truly bizarre night for the sport of boxing that was, and what an undeniably special night it was for one Francis Ngannou, a man who had been forced to deal with quite a lot of criticism and, answering a lot of questions for the way that he managed his exit from the UFC and signing with PFL and so on. And while there are a lot of people today who are waking up and admitting openly that they were wrong about the whole notion of Francis fumbling the bag, I think everyone has good reason not to be too hard on themselves, because how could we have seen that coming? So the event itself was I didn't actually watch the full thing. I tuned in at the co-main event just as it ended, and then I had to wait for another hour and a half before the main attraction begun, which seemed to take forever. But that fight between Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou was one that exceeded my expectations in many ways, but the type of fight that upended all of my predictions too. If you had asked me pre-fight for my best possible route to victory for Francis against a fighter like Fury, I, like most people, would say, bull rushing him. Definitely not to fight a boxing stance in a boxing style against the best boxer in the heavyweight division right now. But that's what we got. Both men came in north of 270 pounds, and what I'll say about this fight is that it did have that gimmicky feel to it, like it was a gimmick fight, like a yet another celebrity fight up until the moment that it didn't. Because in that third round, things started to take on a much more undeniably real feeling. Ngannou from the get-go, after maybe losing the first two rounds narrowly, landed a big shot on Fury and put him down, and it was a genuine connection. I don't subscribe to any of these notions that it was behind the ear. That was an intentional shot thrown when the opponent was right in front of him. Ngannou did what he could and he landed it, and it hurt. And from there, the fight just took on this other meaning entirely. You could have paused the action at that point. Ngannou could have taken a knee and he would have already won some form of moral victory, but what I found to be so impressive was Francis, despite opening up a bit from time to time, he did remain in this tactical shell for the majority of the fight, keeping an eye on his stamina, being handy with his defense, and overall it did seem like he was aware of the bigger picture. This wasn't the same sort of wild Ngannou who tried to get Jairzinho Rozenstruik out of there in the first 20 seconds. I thought that Francis might make an appearance here, especially after the knockdown. But no, this was an Ngannou who, as a self-admitted boxing fan, wanted to go in there and beat Tyson Fury at his own game. And look, I'm going to try and entertain both sides of the fence here, because I think there's a lot to this fight. Tyson Fury looked abysmal in there. He looked out of shape. He came in, 272 pounds or whatever it was? He didn't look like he was in tip-top fight shape. But even with that being the case, he was very clearly flummoxed with Ngannou's approach. It's probably been said many, many times, but the decision from Ngannou to not lead the dance and to play to his own strengths, his weird timing, his awkwardness, his work in the clinch, the physicality of it all. Ngannou in many ways fought the perfect fight for an opponent like Tyson, who is so used to dealing with boxing technicians trying to out-technique him. And that sort of approach from a guy in Ngannou who is known to be wild from time to time, that was very shocking. And I think as soon as Fury tasted that power in the third round, something did kind of click within him. I do personally believe that to some degree he realized that he had bitten off more than he could chew, or at the very least he had underestimated his opponent in basically setting up a fight with Alexander Usyk for December while still fighting this one at the end of October. I think a certain amount of him was like, right, I'm somewhat out of shape, or at the very least not in tip-top shape. I'm in here with a power puncher who can hurt me, and I have a certain amount of confidence in the judges to give me a close decision if that's what it comes to, based on the money they would lose on the Usyk fight. That's just boxing. And I think that Fury made a somewhat maybe semi-conscious informed decision to not open up too much for the rest of the fight. I think in some ways he cut his losses while minimizing the risk, because at the end of the day, if Ngannou had landed for a second time, not only would that be inarguable in the eyes of the judges, but that's another mental image that he would not so easily shake. And so the final 7 rounds of the fight had a certain pace to them that was odd, not because of Ngannou, who did use his bursts of energy wisely, but because Tyson Fury didn't really have an urgency to him, or at least not to the level that we would expect, especially in round 9 and 10 when you could just see his pace drop. He was still fighting and moving quite lackadaisically, and the overarching question was, if not now, then when? But that's what happened. He kind of coasted his way through the rounds, minimized the level of damage he took despite Francis's efforts to blitz him at certain points. And I do think on some level he did that because he did understand that the situation was in some ways getting away from him, and he wasn't prepared for it. He had not planned for this. So yeah, as far as the scoring of the fight goes, here's where the interesting part is. I do not think this was a robbery, okay? I know a lot of people are having a very strong reaction to the scorecards. Personally, and hear me out, please do hear me out, I scored the fight watching live for Tyson Fury, very narrowly. But what I will say is, this is all coming based on the boxing scoring criteria, which Tyson knows better than anyone. What I will say is that Francis Ngannou won his rounds, the 4 rounds that I did give him, he won those rounds more impressively and more definitively than Tyson did with any of his rounds. So at the end of the day, it is a question of maths. There was a lot of 10-9s and 1 10-8 for Ngannou, and each of them had a bigger moment, if memory serves, than Tyson did in the rounds that he won. The rounds that Tyson Fury won they were swing rounds. You know, he either used his jab well to outpoint him, or, you know, he narrowly got him on volume, okay? Put that down to a fault with the scoring system, but 4 very good rounds still isn't enough to beat 6 not so great but winning rounds. So that's kind of how I saw it. Maybe if I watched it back again, I would see it differently, but I believe I had it 4 rounds to 6 with the 10-8 in favor of Tyson Fury. But even if it came to a draw or came to a 6-4 to Ngannou, there's no way the judges would have given him that fight. That's just not how boxing works, so I think discussions over scorecards at this point are totally irrelevant. What matters here is what we saw in the ring. Okay? Because let's be real, Francis Ngannou won that fight. He won the moral victory, he won the respect of the fans, he won a victory for MMA in the face of boxing. I had jokingly said to one of my friends maybe a few minutes before this fight had begun that these crossover fights end up being disappointing and leaving you with an empty feeling 100% of the time. And yet here we are. Look, you can disagree with the scoring, you can have your own interpretation of it. I think it's a robbery in the sense that the boxing scoring system does not accommodate better work over 4 rounds than it does to 6 rounds. Maybe I'm getting those numbers wrong, but you understand the gist of what I'm saying. It's a fault in the scoring system, and yeah, one of the judges had a ridiculous 96-93 scorecard for Tyson, which I don't think is defensible at all. But I think an argument over scoring, especially when it's a bunch of people who are primarily MMA fans doing it, it's just kind of pointless. We all know what we saw, we all know what happened, and we all know what the result is going to be. Francis Ngannou went onto one of the biggest and most elaborate stages possible in an arena filled with some insanely famous and popular people, both within the world of sport and beyond, and he shocked the heavyweight champion, the lineal heavyweight champion, in his professional debut. Is there an argument to be made that that was the greatest boxing debut of all time? Very possibly. Had the judges seen it differently and given Ngannou a win, based on that performance, could you say that that was the biggest upset in the history of boxing? Maybe, maybe not, but it would have been in the discussion. This was the type of performance in a fight that should have been a gimmick. It should have been a far more straightforward affair, a showcase for Tyson Fury, and, maybe he would have carried Ngannou for a few rounds before putting him down. But instead, what we learned was Francis Ngannou can stick to a game plan, he can use his power sparingly, and he also has the type of stamina that, with some time and with some fine-tuning, could allow him to go 12 rounds in a low-output kind of fight like this. If he can get the respect of his opponent through his power, you never know. Ngannou could have something for boxing. I think it's pretty clear that he does. My only worries about this fight and this performance as it relates to Ngannou's future is that his awkward but limited style could well be assessed by, tape study now that we have 10 rounds of action to go off, and a high-level professional heavyweight and his team could be better prepared to deal with him and all of his quirks. That's not to say that he doesn't have great strengths that are going to be difficult for anyone. That power, obviously, his physical strength, his work in the clinch. Tyson wasn't able to use his usual tactics of wearing on his opponents physically because of just how comfortable Ngannou was in those situations. But I do wonder if Ngannou were to face someone within the top 10, how that would play out. I do suspect that he would have a tough time now that there's tape on him. But look, I've been wrong before when it comes to Francis Ngannou, very clearly, like every single other person in this sport. What I will say is that that was a terrible Tyson Fury we saw, and that I would have to back him to get the win if he came in better shape, better prepared with a better game plan and with tape study behind him. But look, I'm not really too bothered making these type of predictions because we're still living in the afterglow of what we just saw there. Do not mistake my attempts to kind of see this through the middle as me trying to take things away from Ngannou, because that's just not what this is at all. Even with all of these factors in play, Francis Ngannou went in there and did what should not have been possible. And he did it against the best heavyweight on the planet, who's probably the best heavyweight we've seen at least since Lennox Lewis, and that just makes no sense to me. It's the sort of thing that could only really happen in the heavyweight division, but if you look at Francis Ngannou and you look at the things that we would have perceived as his faults, you know, the fact that he's a little wild, the fact that his cardio would probably fail him, these things were just not in play. And on top of that, actually, before I forget, I want to take a moment to celebrate the fact that Ngannou has one hell of a chin. I'll admit that in the back of my mind, I was wondering how Francis would hold up in the face of someone as accurate and powerful as Tyson Fury, because let's not forget that Tyson has undergone a bit of a transformation into a knockout artist in recent times. But Ngannou was not fazed. Ngannou was the bully in there to some degree, despite the fact that he wasn't always the one moving forward. He was very much the physical force in there, which when compared to the 6'9" Tyson Fury, that was also one of the bigger shocks of this fight. So yeah, look, this was an amazing night for Francis Ngannou. He didn't win on paper, but I mean, look, we all know the story here. There's only one person who's being talked about with this degree of reverence today. And you know, boxing as a whole, they've been kind of forced to eat a bit of humble pie on this one. Not only does this move the conversation forward as far as, you know, boxing versus MMA, because let's be real, Tyson Fury wouldn't last around against Parker Porter or Junior Tafa or any of these like unranked heavyweights. Like, there shouldn't be this much room for crossover between the sports, but if it is going to happen one way, it's a mixed martial artist coming into boxing. The fact that we've seen one have this level of success now is very, very interesting. And so I would urge you not to be too hard on your boxing brethren. If you think the MMA fan base are shocked right now, they're going through something entirely different. And overall, for now, let's just heap praise on Francis Ngannou. His gamble with his contract and getting out of the UFC has paid off in more ways than we ever could have thought possible. Hell, even if he'd lost this fight against Fury, you know, the money he's made and the freedom, that was all a win already. But now, this man has done something that nobody thought possible. And through this moral victory, he has opened doors for himself that we just never thought would be possible for an MMA fighter. So yeah, these are my initial thoughts. I've only watched the fight once, so forgive me if I'm a little short on the details of the exact scoring, but put the scorecards to one side, put boxing's scoring criteria to one side, and just acknowledge the fact that Francis Ngannou did something here that just should not have happened. But it wasn't a stray punch, it wasn't a single moment, it was a prolonged 10-round performance that, although not good enough to win in terms of the scorecards in the eyes of the definitely not corrupt and influenceable Riyadh judges, to put it simply, Ngannou won the night. And Tyson Fury has to do some very long and hard thinking about what he needs to do next. Because sure, the Usyk fight is there, but you know, both the MMA fanbase and in particular the boxing fanbase, we all know what we just saw. And though fighting Usyk is probably the most important fight for the heavyweight division right now, can you really leave this one as it is? Can you leave that sort of taste in the mouth of your fans? Where an absolute novice was able to come in as a debutant and give you a fight that you yourself described as one of the toughest of your career. I don't know about that. I for one would like to see this one rematched. You could do it over 12 rounds with the belts on the line, and even that, even though I would back Fury to win if he came in between 250 and 260 pounds, Ngannou would take home another purse that would, you know, probably be 20 or 30 million, at least. So yeah, this is just, it's a huge turn of events for Francis and his prospects as a 37-year-old semi-retired MMA fighter, I guess we could call it, because, you know, why go back to MMA now? But I'm just so happy for the guy. Considering his story, considering his trajectory, and considering how he went head-to-head with the UFC, which is important to happen, the fact that he's come out of it looking like this so far is pretty incredible. And to be honest, I just can't wait to hear what Dana White has to say about all this. If I had to bet, he'll go down the route of saying, "Did you guys see Tyson Fury? That guy was fat." He'll do something, I'm sure, to try and take away from Francis here, because at the end of the day, he messed up. The UFC messed up. A lot of the fans, myself included, read this one all wrong, but I mean, we're only going off what we know, and this fight just broke all logic. So anyway, yeah, what did you make of Francis Ngannou's narrow defeat at the hands of Tyson Fury? And how did you score it? On top of that, what do you think the future holds for the Predator, especially if he does end up ranked within the heavyweight top 10? Do let us know your opinions in the comment section below, before leaving a like and a comment and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Thank you for watching.